But we begin tonight with a chilling moment, I got to say. I don't know any other way to say it. The president of the United States threatening violence to stay in power. Sounds weird coming out of my mouth, but that's what happened. When explicitly asked to commit to a peaceful transfer of power today, he declined, and this was his response.
Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else.
Just to be clear, if you're talking to a person and you ask them to commit to behave peacefully and they refuse, they're threatening violence, right? What the president is doing here is the most explicit that he has been about his plans for this election. He's plotting in open, in public, repeatedly, a coup to steal the election and hold on to power. Again, it all sounds crazy to say. It is what we are seeing. Those are the plain facts as assembled before us. It's not a behind-the-scenes type of thing. It's happening in public, in plain view. The election is 41 days away. People are already voting. And look, a few things can happen between now and November 3rd. I mean, the polls could all be wrong. It could turn out that Donald Trump is just much more popular than it appears to be right now, even with 200,000 plus Americans dead from a pandemic. Or some event could happen that changes things dramatically, and Donald Trump could just win. He could win outright. He could win the popular vote in the Electoral College in a clear and evident fashion. That is a possibility. Another possibility, one that right now polls would indicate is much more likely, is that if Democrats fight and organized and the broad bipartisan anti-Trump majority in this country comes out and votes in unprecedented numbers, that Joe Biden could sweep by 8 or 9 or 10 points in the popular vote, as many as 400 Electoral College votes, a decisive, historic, unambiguous rout. That's another possibility. But we also may land somewhere between those two ends, where the margins are tight and the outcome is not obvious right away. And that's what the president is very explicitly planning for. Because those tight margins, that ambiguity, sets in motion his plan to steal the election. Now, there are already attempts all over the country to make it harder for Democratic constituencies to vote. There's voter ID requirements. Those have been around a while. And there's been plans to send Trump-friendly volunteers to patrol polling places and intimidate voters. We saw that in early voting in Virginia after a consent decree that used to stop the Republican Party from doing that has lapsed. There are also, right, as part of this kind of attempt, there are lawsuits all over the country filed by the Trump campaign and Republicans, places like Pennsylvania, right, where the Trump campaign and Republicans sued to block voters from using drop boxes, of all things, to turn in their ballots, right? That's because they don't want people to be able to vote. And then there is the key tactic, the key rhetorical tactic, which is what we have seen time and time again. The relentless attacks, aided by William Barr's lies, on legitimacy and integrity of mail-in voting while the country is still in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic that has not ebbed because of the president's failures. And so the president has been attempting, successfully in many cases, to polarize views of mail-in versus in-person voting around support for himself. The goal is that the pro-Trump minority of the country, and it is a clear minority, let's be clear here, right now, as I speak to you, that minority votes in person on Election Day, and that the anti-Trump majority, perhaps more concerned about the pandemic, that they largely vote by mail. Of course, the president's abject mishandling and politicization of the coronavirus crisis has a lot to do with us being in this position to begin with. And now the president has been explicit about why he's doing this, right? He will take advantage of something called the red mirage, where more Republican votes come in first because those people voted in person, making it look like Trump is ahead on election night. And then he will attempt to use the courts to delay something called the blue shift, which is just the counting of more heavily Democratic mail-in votes. They're all the same votes. They're all just getting counted at different times, right? Keep that in mind, right? There's a stack that's over here. There's a stack that's over there. If the election night stack is very Republican and the mail-in stack that gets kind of later very Democratic, there's no difference between those votes. But he will try to use the courts then to invalidate as many of those mail-in ballots in this stack over here as he can. Remember, this is why today he refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power, the mail-in ballots. Get rid of those ballots, he said. Those mail-in ballots are also the reason the president keeps saying that he is counting on the courts, the federal courts, to help him win. He's not going to wait for the ballots to be counted. He's saying it. That is why the president and his allies, like Senator Ted Cruz, are also making this part of their explicit argument to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the Supreme Court. They're all out there. Mike Pence said the same thing. We should have 9 justices on the bench, an odd number, to resolve the election. Keep in mind, Republicans already have a 5-3 majority of the court. But apparently, they do not trust Chief Justice John Roberts to be enough of a hack to corruptly hand them the White House. So that's everything they're doing in public. But it is even worse in private behind the scenes, especially when you think about how they might use the power of the presidency, again, to corruptly steal the election after the votes are cast. And this is the subject of this new piece by Pulitzer Prize winner Bart Gellman titled "The Election That Could Break America." The piece is nearly 10,000 words long, and it breaks down just how much effort and planning is going into stealing the election. Now, Bart Gellman's going to be joining us in just a few minutes, but I want to take you through a piece of his reporting. Again, this is not like fan fiction. It's not like doom casting about what's going to happen. This is reporting, right? The Trump campaign reportedly actively engaged in conversations about appointing loyal electors for the Electoral College in battleground states where Republicans hold the legislative majority, with a justification, again, based on those claims of rampant fraud, right? The seeds he's been sowing. Trump would then ask state legislators to set aside the popular vote and exercise their power to choose a slate of electors directly. So in this scenario, after the president and his party litigate and they delay and they fight and they scratch and they claw, and hopefully they get lucky with a bunch of judges that Donald Trump installed, and they get them not to count as many of the mail-in votes as possible and take a long time, those votes that they suspect are largely Democratic, and then the Republican-controlled state legislators would agree to discount the will of the people of their states because, well, who can really say there's all this fraud? Just listen to the president and hand him his electors under victory in the Electoral College. I know it sounds like dystopic science fiction. It's just the reality we live in right now. It's what is happening in front of our eyes. We have to be honest about it the same way we had to be honest about what the virus was going to do to this country back in late February. It is, frankly, a plan for an authoritarian power grab. Now, as you digest this, before you get paralyzed by this nightmare scenario, because part of the plan here, I think, is to kind of psych people into paralysis, there are even more nightmare scenarios we're going to talk about. But the key thing important to remember is there is an off-ramp here. And it doesn't lie with Donald Trump. It doesn't really lie with Mitch McConnell or federal judges or anyone. The off-ramp, the remedy to avoid all this, is just a historic mobilization of the country's anti-Trump, pro-democratic majority. Coming out to vote, delivering a resounding, unquestionable defeat to the president and his agenda in order to save American self-governance.